Hello, viewers. Welcome to the YouTube channel Lex Consilium Foundation. Our talk with the professor and the author of the book Militarization of Outer Space and International Law, brought out recently by Routledge Publishers. And we had spoken so far about the so called arms race that stands triggered off with relation to the work in outer space in the area of weaponization. Moving beyond that, Umesh, would you like to clarify as to how the international community has responded to the legal regime as it exists now?
Well, the United Nations started looking into this particular challenge of space weaponization since 1980s. There are two or three forums which are relevant in this connection. There is the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Initially, it was looked into by the committee, but there were some objections, especially the United States and other Western countries. They said that arms race in outer space cannot be detached from arms race on the surface of the earth. So the proper forum to discuss this would be the Committee on Disarmament, the United Nations Committee, which was renamed in 1979 as the Conference on Disarmament. But prior to 1979, the issue was referred to the Committee on Disarmament. It has been on the agenda of the committee. Various proposals were made by a number of countries, and more recently, in the sense from 2008, China and Russia have collaborated with each other to bring out a draft treaty. And in 2008, they submitted some draft principles for a future treaty on prohibition of placement of weapons in outer space. Then it was revised in 2014, the draft, and it is known as the treaty. It is shortly known as PPWT, that is Treaty for Prohibition of Placement of Weapons in Outer Space and any threat or use of force in outer space. So this draft is currently being negotiated. However, United States and other Western countries have some serious objections. The first objection is that US is not happy with definition of space objects because the treaty does not cover ground to space weapons.
Okay, that has been left out.
Left out for obvious reasons, because both China and Russia, they have the capacity and they are keen on developing ground-based space weapons. They talk only about threat of use of force in outer space and placement of weapons in outer space proper, etc., etc. And that is one bone of contention. Then United States also says that there is no mechanism for verification of the treaty obligations. Even if the treaty is adopted, how do you verify it? And that needs to be developed. And finally, the US has also raised an objection that the treaty doesn't prohibit development and manufacture and possession. It only prohibits its use. So it is quite likely that some countries, even if they are parties to the treaty, they may develop, they may manufacture, and they may possess the weapons. There is no possibility that in the current format, the draft would be acceptable to a large number of states. The differences are quite substantial, and there is no possibility of any kind of compromise being reached between two groups of states. On one hand, China and Russia, on the other hand, Western countries and United States.
Having regard to this serious impasse, if I can use the word,
Yes,
are
certainly.
there any sort of bilateral or multilateral efforts being initiated independently?
There is a European Union draft code of conduct for outer space, which was prepared in 2010 by European Union, and they organized a few meetings by inviting a number of space powers and other countries which were not involved in drafting of the code. It's a draft code after all, but it has not received general support, and many countries they feel that they were left out. They were not consulted while preparing the draft. Then there are some private initiatives, private in the sense academic institutions. There is probably you are aware that McGill University in Canada has long time back in 1950s established an Institute of Air and Space Law, and under the auspices of this institute number of activities are being carried out. Of course, they are teaching a course in air and space law. They conduct extensive research on aviation and space related activities. But in 2016, they adopted a manual. It's known as Manual on International Law Applicable to Military Activities in Outer Space. So it is nothing but a collection of existing norms and rules which are quite relevant. As I said earlier, a prohibition on use of force, Article 2, Paragraph 4 of UN Charter, self-defense, etc. Then prohibition on placement of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction and so on. A similar effort was conducted in Australia by University of Adelaide and a number of other academic institutions, which is known as the Woomera Manual. Woomera is a Aboriginal term. It's something to do with a spear which can be thrown. I mean, this is kind of symbolic significance. It's known as the Woomera Manual 2024. It also has looked into the existing norms, but its focus is more on international humanitarian law.
Okay.
How international humanitarian law would apply and would regulate military activities in outer space. There are a few developments have taken place, but they are not very significant. And currently, as you rightly said, there is a kind of impasse in as far as the development of new legal norms are concerned.
Now, Umesh, you had indicated right when you spoke about your association with the National Law School of Bangalore and other universities, your specialization in public international law. You mentioned that out of the four options that were there, the four options, one included the space law. Having regard to that, it becomes obvious that you have almost half a century worth of experience and interest in space law. And this book that you wrote for Rutledge, the first of its kind. So certainly, I have not seen the book, but there would be a conclusion or a final chapter in this book. Now, I am coming to you, Professor Umesh Kadam, individually as a scholar, if I can use the word practitioner of space law. What are your recommendations, suggestions, or what is your wish list having regard to this? How should this law progress? How should it be further developed?
Well, I have a few ideas which I have expressed in my book, as you rightly mentioned. My first conclusion is states which are currently very serious about ballistic missile defense by developing space weapons is extremely dangerous. This kind of initiative is dangerous for various reasons because it will further enhance the arms race. It will give further impetus to arms race. And states will try to develop new types of intercontinental ballistic missiles which may not be dealt with by the new technology which is being developed. So this is like a vicious circle, that you develop defensive systems to defend from ballistic missiles. Adversary develops new types of missiles. So this is extremely dangerous, and this is in relation to a plan which was announced by President Donald Trump when he was elected the second time. And he said, we want to create a golden dome for America, a kind of defensive shield. And contracts have been awarded to a number of private space companies which are working on creation of such a kind of defensive mechanism. But in my view, from strategic point of view, it is an extremely dangerous kind of move, and that is likely to further add fuel to the arms race.
Further aggravate.
Now, aggravate. Now, my major conclusion is that it is almost impossible to directly talk about a treaty for banning weapons in outer space. That is out of question. What we need is a step by step approach. You cannot achieve everything in one step. And therefore, it is quite possible to think of a moratorium on testing of certain types of weapons. For example, direct ascent anti-satellite weapon. Because some countries had declared a unilateral moratorium during the past for certain period of time. But this can be further looked into by United Nations General Assembly or the Conference on Disarmament, and states may be called upon to suspend certain plans which they have launched, further go ahead with the development of weapons. So some kind of moratorium. Now, another approach is, my suggestion is a soft law approach. And by soft law, what I mean is that sometimes it is not possible to arrive at a treaty at one go. So you need to precede the adoption of treaty by non-binding instruments like a declaration. And we have a number of examples. 1967 Outer Space Treaty was adopted. It was preceded by a United Nations General Assembly declaration recommending certain legal principles to states. So that was like creation of some kind of background and having some kind of consensus which is not binding as such. But from there you move on to a binding commitment. Another best example is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was adopted in 1948, but it was not a binding instrument. It was just a recommendation, it's a declaration of fundamental human rights. But this was transformed into two binding treaties in 1966. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Because 1966 covenants, their background was set by the Universal Declaration in 1948. And therefore, I think for dealing with issue on threat of space weapons, we need that kind of approach. That you
Step by step and
gradual, and you create soft law, non-binding law to begin with, and then think of transforming that into a binding kind of treaty. Another issue is transparency and confidence building measures. And here there are some countries which are focusing on this, including United States. They say that we should work more on transparency and confidence building measures that will pave way for further binding obligations which can be accepted in the form of a treaty. Another issue is regarding the safety of space assets, because space assets have become extremely crucial for our survival. I mean, you can think of a number of satellites which are providing essential services in our society, whether it is from banking needs to health services or civil aviation and other type of transport, whatever it is. These have proved extremely useful, and these space assets need to be protected. And hence, there is a concept which I have included in one of my recommendations is there you can create an exclusive space security zones, that you have a crucial satellite. Around that satellite, there should be a kind of security zone. That means no other object should enter into that security zone. This is in relation to the killer satellites I explained earlier.
Yes.
That satellite approaching an adversary satellite and exploding in the vicinity. But to avoid that kind of thing, if there is an understanding to create exclusive security zone around satellites, that will probably go a long way. Then another moratorium, a kind of ban on nuclear powered X-ray lasers could be thought about, because lasers can be created by other mechanisms as well, not necessarily a nuclear detonation. There are chemical lasers as well. Nuclear sources should not be used in outer space. And as I said earlier, my interpretation of Article 3 of the Outer Space Treaty is that only those nuclear weapons which are weapons of mass destruction have been prohibited. So nuclear powered X-rays would not come within the purview of that ban, and they can be lawfully, I mean without violating any law, can be developed and deployed on board satellites. But there should be a kind of moratorium. Another dimension is, and this has proved useful in many other areas of international law, is that the civil society campaigns should be launched against the development of these weapons. You see, if you look back at last 20, 30 years, you see the Ottawa Treaty on Anti-Personnel Landmines. It was adopted
Yes.
because of the force of civil society campaign, the international campaign to ban landmines that was adopted. The same campaign took up the cause of cluster munitions eventually. So there is a protocol on prohibition of use of cluster munitions. The similar campaign was launched when the Rome Statute on ICC was being discussed. Civil society was very active. Civil society is also active with another kind of dangerous development, and that is development of autonomous weapons based on artificial intelligence. This is equally dangerous area in the field of weapons technology, and there is a civil society campaign to ban robotic weapons or so-called autonomous lethal weapons, which are being developed, seriously developed by some countries. And then once the atmosphere is created with various steps, like declarations of principles, moratorium, some kind of civil society campaign, then you can think of negotiating a binding convention, a treaty. Some experts are saying that there could be an optional protocol to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. But I would rather suggest adoption of a specific treaty on space weapons. That would be ideal as a long-term goal.
Well, Professor Umesh Kadam, you have given a brilliant exposition about this new book and introduced its approach, its utility, and the viewpoint to our viewers. And I have no doubt that the hard and sustained effort put in by you in bringing out this book would hugely benefit all the scholars and the practitioners, the civil society, and the policy makers to this very significant aspect relating to the weapons in outer space and their regulation. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, General. Thank you. You're most welcome. Anytime.